Yes, y'all. This is Civic Cipher, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. And of course, this show exists to empower the community and give a voice to the movements, the various movements, and the struggles, even, and really to empower us all individually, as groups, as cultures, and as far as we relate to each other. And today's guest on the show is somebody that I don't even know if I want to call you a personal hero, but I think I'm going to go ahead and say it just because I've been so inspired by you that I've changed a significant amount of my life just to make sure that I got a chance to interview you. Her name is Zarra, and she is the Minister of Activism with Black Lives Matter. So welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to meet you, and thanks for having me here.
I appreciate it. So a little bit more about how I got a chance to get to know Zarra is I went to a protest in Tempe. Now, I'd seen her before. We actually had a chance to talk before, but in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Deion Johnson, there were a lot of rallies where I live in Phoenix. And I went out to a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests, and I got a chance to see a lot of the organization. And I showed up with a bullhorn just because I had one, and one of the other people that had a bullhorn was Zarra. And so I did my best to echo sort of what she was saying, because when there's a crowd of 4,000 or 5,000 people, would you say something like that? There's a lot of folks out there. When a crowd is that big, you end up not really reaching everybody with a bullhorn. A bullhorn is good for like the first 300 people. When you have 3,000, it's just not going to work. So we had to kind of echo the message throughout the crowd. And I noticed very early on that what she was saying was very potent and very powerful. And I really wanted to make sure that she had a chance to get on the air and say some of the things that she was saying that energized the crowd and motivated people to take action. And also, after those first couple of protests, I would come home and I would watch like 12 News and some of the other media outlets. And I recognized that there was not two sides. There was not a lot of balance there. It was those guys telling their version of the story. In other words, to them, everyone was a rioter. There were riots and all that sort of stuff. And then I was there with my children, and it wasn't that. It was very much to empower the community. And so I felt like this woman is one of the women who needed a platform to say something. And when I saw her in Tempe, there was another protest in Tempe. We stopped by the courthouse, and you stood up with, I think there was like a gate or something covering like a water main or something. You stood on that. You got a bullhorn again, and you just addressed this huge crowd, and it was so potent and it was so powerful, and it really spoke to what it was that was happening. Sort of the spirit of the movement. And again, that's when I decided, you know what, I need to do more than just show up. I need to lend as many resources to this as I can, specifically to this message. And you happen to be the person carrying that message. And it moved me and my children. We talked about that when we went home, a lot of the things that you said. And so I wanted to say that just so that you understand exactly how important this meeting was to me. And of course, on this show, we're going to have sit-down conversations with lots of folks who are very active in the community. But this one was a long time coming, and again, I appreciate you coming out. So I think first things first, tell me a little bit about what got you into activism.
So there's a few things that got me into activism. I think I was a little bit inclined because my mom and my sister were involved in their union. They're both nurses. And so kind of through that was able to kind of have a consciousness of that things were not right, that healthcare should be free, that education should be free, and that just a critical consciousness. But really what brought me out was during Occupy, and when the student debt hit larger than the than like home mortgages, and it hit like 1 trillion. And I remember that moment, and remembering that like the system is rigged, and that we have a bunch of the 1% that is oppressing the 99%, and really got involved then, and then continued to do activism, whether it was about inequality or environmental justice. But what really got me involved in the activism I'm doing now with Black Lives Matter, was first going to South Africa right before the Trayvon Martin shooting, and being able to see that white supremacy is global, and that around the world we have a system where our lives don't matter simply because the color of our skin. And, I always thought, the motherland, everything would be better there. And to see Black people still as second rate, still their lives still don't matter on their indigenous homeland in South Africa. And then to come home and see this young boy being murdered simply because he was Black, it really pulled me into the streets, and decided we're going to do something about this.
Very good. It's funny. I saw something the other day. So we're recording this on the heels of the shootings in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and something that is very telling is that there was I'm sure everyone knows the story, but there's a young white male, 17 years old, walking down the street with a clearly visible assault rifle, and he's walking toward the police, and he's walking past the police. He's not pointing the gun at them, but that doesn't matter, because I saw something last night. The Atlanta Black Star put up a clip, and this was, I want to say, September 2nd, 2020. In Washington, D.C. And there was a kid. He was on live stream. I think he had just turned 18. He's on live stream, and he's in, it looked like some projects. I'll tell you the story if you don't know. He's sitting in the car with some of his other friends, and he's sort of showing off a gun. Now, what happens is the police see the live stream, and they pull up and they shoot the kid, okay? But not before the kid throws the gun as far away from the officer as possible. They found the gun so far away. And then there's body cam footage of the guy who runs and shoots the kid in the chest. So the kid was running away as he threw the gun. The officer circled around in front of him and shot him in the chest, and obviously he died. And then went to go look for the gun. It took him like 5 minutes to find the gun that was so far away. And I think it shows that panic response with the police. But I want to say something real quick just while we're here. And to anyone that'll listen, now that I have a microphone and an audience, having a gun is not always a crime. This kid was an adult and so forth and so on. But even if you wanted to make that argument, I think Zarra kind of touched on the fact that there are certain economic conditions that really lend themselves to Black and brown folks ending up in environments where, sometimes you have to fight for survival or fight to protect the things that you've earned, or, anything like that. And so a lot of times in those environments, you do find people that protect themselves in that way. And if having a gun is not necessarily a crime, especially if it's not pointed at an officer, and it makes sense that a lot of people in those really harsh environments do have weapons or other means of protecting themselves, then to show up and shoot them is more indicative of a panic response than it is of just the normal state of things. With that said, I want to touch on this rallying cry that initially it might sound jarring to people who, maybe when they first heard it, or maybe they have heard it over and over again and maybe not know exactly what it means. But you explained it so well. What does defund the police mean?
Yeah, I think it's really important for folks to realize, because when people say defund the police, a lot of, the white middle class have been like, you talking about purge? And, it's not that. It's not that. It's really important to see that where we're at and what public safety means. And when we look at where we're at right now, we know that especially in poor neighborhoods, but even in rich white neighborhoods, you call the cops after the crime has happened, right? You call the cops once they've broken into your house. You call the cops after something's been stolen, after harm has been had. So if we can agree on that, then we can agree that the police aren't keeping us safe. They're just coming after to try to clean up after the mess has been made. What we're calling for is preventative measures. We're calling for, why is that person breaking into your house in the first place? What made them? What pushed them that? Is it mental health? Is it drug addiction? Is it poverty? Those are systemic issues, and we can fix those issues. So when we call for defunding the police, what we're calling for is an investment into communities, an investment into mental health, an investment into community services, into being able to address systemic poverty, being able to, right now we do not have no social safety net for those who have mental health issues. And when we call the police, they often end up dead. So what we're calling for is a change to that. And I think that's something that we can all agree on. Even police, I think, will agree that they are not, and they've said it before, they're not able to handle. They do not have the skills or equipped with, the tools to be able to handle mental health issues, to handle homelessness, to handle drug addiction, and yet those are the people who are being called. So when we call for defunding the police, we're calling for other people to call. Who else can we call to address drug addiction? Who actually has the skills and the tools and the training to be able to help in that situation, instead of what do police have? They're armed with only guns. And so what ends up happening is people who are in crisis then have the cops call on them, and then it creates a larger crisis. So when we call for defunding the police, we're calling for a reimagination of what safety is, and a rebuilding and restructuring of the social safety net, so that these crimes don't happen. And that makes us all safer, because, when we strengthen the social safety net, when we make sure we leave no one behind, that's how you actually reduce crime. It's not by getting more cops on the street. It's by preventing people from having to do these crimes in the first place, because no one actually wants to commit crimes. It's the society that creates the structures where it causes people to feel like they have no other option but to commit these crimes. And so once we invest in community, we reduce our reliance on police, and that doesn't make us less safe, it makes us more safe.
Okay. So what do you say to someone who says, well, in recent years, there has been an increase in police funding and a decrease in the overall crime rate, and that correlation cannot be ignored? What do you say to a person with an argument like that?
So crime actually started going down in the under Bill Clinton, and despite the fact that crime was going down, there was a lot of factors in why that happened. But while crime was going down, he actually pushed for the crime bill, pushed for further criminalization of people, and also for further funding of police departments and prisons. And so we've created this system based off of this fear. And when you look at the type of ads Clinton was running to pass the crime bill, it was criminalization, and primarily of black men, and the right still does this. And, that basically it's scare tactics. But when you look at the data, we see that crime's been going down regardless, and yet we've put all this money into police. And what has that done? How are we even defining crime? Because police killings have been going up as we've been overfunding these police departments, as we've been hiring military people to treat the streets of America like a battleground. And does that make us safer? I think we could all agree that doesn't make us safer. So I think when we look at what's needed and what helps, it's not more funding to the police department. Research has shown a great way to decrease crime is actually to fund pre-K education. And then when you fund pre-K education, all of those who get access to that, it reduces the likelihood that they will go into be, victim of the school to prison pipeline, be victim of the whole carceral system. And so when we look at how much we're spending on police, and then we look at how much like a pre-K program costs, or how much it costs to reduce class sizes so that, kids, because they're basing how many prisons to build off of third grade reading scores. And so we are continuing to divest from education, divest from like community resources, while we're investing into this militarized occupying police force. So what is that going to create? It's going to create like a war. We don't have money for, education, but we have money for guns. Is that the type of society that we want to live in? That is not a society that we are safer. That's not a society where, it's a society where we're all treated like criminals.
Okay, very good. Now, there's a lot of, activism on the streets. And, these are some messages that I've heard you speak about before, and I've heard them echoed in other organizations that work alongside Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter, the official Black Lives Matter, of course, as a statement, that's a statement that many people can get behind. Not everyone, because obviously there's the All Lives Matter cry from some folks, and that also is a true statement in and of itself. But obviously the reason for Black Lives Matter, for those of us that understand it, is kind of built into the narrative already of our lives. But even though I know the answer, I have to ask the question: does Black Lives Matter condone anarchy and unlawfulness?
So one, there's Black Lives Matter, like the national, whom I cannot speak for, okay. And then Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro. And we are not an official chapter of Black Lives Matter National. They haven't been accepting chapters for 4 or 5 years now, but. That being said, so I would feel more comfortable just speaking to Black Lives Matter Phoenix, but our values are aligned with Black Lives Matter National, so there isn't really much of a difference here. As far as does Black Lives Matter engage in that anarchy and lawlessness? No. But as far as condemning it, we have an understanding of it, much like MLK, that a riot is the voice of the unheard. And we understand that, it's the social conditions that cause people to riot. We understand that, that people engage in that way when they've had everything taken from them. And so, again, when we think about how to make our community safer, if these people had something to lose, that wouldn't have happened in the first place. And Absolutely. So, it's the social conditions that create the riots. It's being disenfranchised for so long. It's having your community disinvested, everything from the redlining to the disinvestment of public transportation to the disinvestment of even down to the sidewalks and trees, which we don't have in Black and brown neighborhoods. We see that our lives don't matter. We see that our government doesn't care about us. And for the folks who are most disenfranchised and have nothing to lose, and after the continual disrespect and disregard for our lives, it causes the conditions for a riot. And so I wouldn't. I don't condone, but I don't engage in that way. However, I think it's important to recognize the way to stop riots is not bring in martial law, like they've been doing. It's not to bring in federal police like they did in Portland. What did that do? It just made people more angry because you're adding fuel to the fire. The way to stop the riots is to stop unhearing the people, right? If a riot is the voice of the unheard, if you listen to what the people are saying and actually show that our lives matter and actually address these things, then there won't be riots. But as long as you treat people like their lives don't matter, you disinvest in their community, you disregard their life, you're creating the conditions of the riot. So I don't actually blame the, individual rioters. I blame the societal conditions that allowed for that to happen in the first place. And if we look at a systemic level, if we want to change this, the way that we do it is change the societal conditions to prevent rioting.
So it's funny that you mentioned that. I was in Portland maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was they call it Ground Zero there, where all the riots are happening. And I think it's very important. This conversation is important for another reason, because a lot of folks, I think that if you haven't participated in a riot or really in a protest, which I haven't been in a riot, but I have been to a lot of the protests. So what you have is a lot of angry people who, like you said, MLK said it best, they don't feel heard. They're making very simple demands. I think that there's a lot of compromise built into the fact that we're protesting and not rioting already. We just want to be heard. So these are people who are willing to have a conversation, and they've taken to the streets, and they haven't, they're not necessarily anarchists. Of course, there might be individuals in the crowd, but for the most part, the group is trying to move a social agenda forward. And when I was in Oregon or in Portland, you understand that the people out there, they're not opportunistic. They're not trying to break in and steal stuff necessarily. That's a function of, people being at their wits' end, and one person does something, and then there's a way for people to vent their frustration or otherwise receive some form of recompense in that moment. And what I saw when I was there is people just frustrated. They're just setting fires, not to gain anything, but just because it will get attention. And if we do this, then you have to hear us now. And that's really what I got a sense of when I was out there. Same in DC. There wasn't a lot of that going on, but just talking to the folks in DC, I was in DC maybe 3 weeks ago. And same thing happened out there, when I was talking to people, and they were discussing how they were dealing with counter protesters and things like that. I do want to share a quick story. Actually, you know what? I'll wait. I'll share the story in just a bit. Before we get there, let's talk about Marxism. For the folks that don't know, does Black Lives Matter consider itself a Marxist organization?
Black Lives Matter National has said that. One of the co-founders has said that they're a Marxist organization, but I also think it's important what people understand what that means.
Absolutely.
Because I think that since the Cold War, there's this hysteria when you mention Marxism that makes people be like, like you're somehow like...
it's like it's a scary word.
Yeah, and so...
like socialism.
Exactly. And so, with what they mean when they say they are Marxists is that they, believe in free education. They believe in free healthcare for all. They do not believe in the monopoly that we currently reside in, where, the 1% owns 99% of the wealth. And that's how we're set up now. And when we look at, the fact that as of right now, we have some of the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression. But The stocks tell us a different story. They say the economy's good because the 1% is still making money. Like, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, he has made so much. He's made billions off of our backs while he's paying people minimum wage. If you think that's wrong, then you're probably a Marxist too. And so while BLM Phoenix Metro, we are anti-capitalist, and there's a lot that we draw from Marxism, we also believe we draw from a tradition of like the Black Panthers and the Zapatistas type of Marxism, which is a little bit different because a lot of Marxism, was said by an old white dead man, and it isn't as relevant to us, but like there are things that draw upon that as anti-capitalist, which we most definitely are, and we definitely see the fact that, this system isn't working, that when 1% of the country owns 99% of the wealth, there's a problem here. And, capitalism likes to, and America likes to give this beautiful dream, which is, that's all it is a dream. It's not a manifested reality, which is if you work really hard, then you can make it, then you can be rich too. And so many Americans, basically hold on to capitalism because they want to be rich too one day. But the reality is, if you're not born into it, if you don't know the right old white men, you're not getting in. You're not gonna make it. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It's a lie that we've been sold, that we continue to sell, that if you just work hard, you'll get rich. And the reality is that this system is rigged, and that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is a system that ultimately ends up where one person has all the money. We've all played Monopoly. We know how the game ends. That's how capitalism ends. And so we're against that, because the reality is that when we look at capitalism and how it started off of our backs. When we look at Wall Street, the first Wall Street sold slaves. That's what it was, an auction block. And we have to look at the fact that capitalism would have never existed if it wasn't for slavery, the genocide of Native Americans, and the theft of entire continents, including Africa, South America, and what we know as America today. All of that is how capitalism was created. So, of course, if, this system was never built for us, it's not going to work for us, because the surplus, the Marxist term is primitive accumulation, which is all the wealth that was accumulated through colonialism. That is how white people have the wealth. Even when you look at Chase Bank, when you look at all of these rich people today, they got their money from slavery. And so we as Black people have to understand that while they'll let a few tokens in so that they can say the system isn't racist, so that they can say there's a Black billionaire, we're never all, this system not only wasn't built for us, it was built on our backs, and it requires us to be in poverty. It requires, in order to have a 1%, you need the 99% in poverty. And so that's what, when we say that we're Marxists or anti-capitalist, that's what we mean. We say that we're against the inequality. We're against minimum wage, that when you can work full time and still not be able to afford housing or be able to live on your own. And that is the system of capitalism, and that is a system of inequality and oppression, which we denounce.
Absolutely. Now, there was a... to piggyback off of what we were talking about earlier, about the voice of the unheard, and then sort of the wealth gap, something, and this was part of the story that I wanted to tell earlier, so I'll tell it in brief, but do you remember there was a day when there's a mall here in Arizona, in Scottsdale. It's called Fashion Square Mall, and this made national headlines, and there was a protest in front of the mall that quickly turned into a looting of the mall. And I got a call from my son was staying the night over there on that night. And I got a call from the folks that lived over there, and they says, hey, there's some activity going on at the mall. You might want to come grab your son, because they live right across the street from there. So I drove over. I realized, there's no riot here. There's nothing going on. These are children. And, that was that. But I did see like droves of police, and the police weren't engaging, fortunately, and no one got hurt, to the best of my understanding. So I didn't pick up my son. There was nothing to see there. But because I saw the police and I didn't know that they weren't engaging, and I saw all these children, I decided that I was going to make sure that the people that were in the mall got away from the police without dying or otherwise getting beat up and thrown in jail or whatever. And obviously I can't save everyone, but I'm there in a truck or, whatever I was driving that day. I invited as many people who wanted to get into my car and let me drive you to where you're going so you don't have to walk by the police, so they won't hurt you. And of course, some folks jumped in the car. And what I heard in the back seat, of course, it was children. I made 3 or 4 trips just helping folks out. And no one was bragging about a new belt or, whatever they got. No one was bragging about that. What I heard, and this happened in my life, so no one can take this experience from me. Anyone with anyone who's on the outside looking in, I was there, and I was actually talking with the people this night, and then got tear gas later downtown, a whole separate city. Anyway, the kids that were in my car, all of them, beginning to end, were explaining just sort of like what you said about how there was, there's a great deal of hopelessness in their communities. And now maybe they'll listen to us. That was a direct quote from one of the kids. I don't know these people's names or anything. I wasn't there for that. Now maybe they'll listen to us. And this is them talking amongst themselves in the back seat. I think one person just broke a window. He didn't actually leave with anything, but he was so happy to see that the activity at the mall was going to affect the 1%. It was going to have to, rattle them a bit to where they understood, okay, you have to deal with the people. You can't just take and take and take. You have to actually deal with them. And that was really the tone that underscored that night. And so I think that speaks to a lot of what you're saying here. And a lot of people may not know that. When you take a step back and you look at the human component, and not property values or buildings or whatever. I saw a quote on the internet the other day, and it was something like, why does, a riot justify murder, but a murder doesn't justify a riot, or something like that. And I thought that was a potent sentiment. But in any event, I did want to make sure that I mentioned that, because again, I think that in a personal experience of my own, I think that speaks to what it is that we're discussing here. Now, in terms of other organizations, or ideas, rather, concepts besides Marxism, do you know if Black Lives Matter, or would you say rather that Black Lives Matter is affiliated with Antifa?
Real quick, I just want to say something about,
sure.
You said,
Okay.
The youth, and I think that's a really important part. While the youth might not identify as Marxist per se, I think that the youth understand, because they were born into a recession caused by these greedy banks who were then bailed out by our government, and the people got sold out. And this is, what they grew up in. So most kids these days are anti-capitalist because of that. They see that the banks are greedy. They see that, and they realize, and they've lived through now multiple recessions, right? It's not just the, 2008 one. Now it's the one that we're currently in. And when we look at why it was, it's again the greed of the corporations who decided to continue to put people at work, to not address this the way it should be. And so, yeah, I think that is where the youth are at, and I think that means a lot for our future. But to go to your point about Antifa, I think that's a great question, because I think a lot of people, again, don't know what Antifa is. Antifa is anti-fascism, right? So if you're not Antifa, that would make you pro-fascism, which would make you a Nazi. So I'm pretty sure most people, if you, when you put it like that, most people are like, no, I'm not pro-fascist, then you're anti-fascist, right? If you don't support Nazis, then you're Antifa. Yes, there are, and it's really been around Trump, who's been kind of acting like Antifa's this gang that, goes around breaking things and all of these things. Really, Antifa is about being anti-fascist, and so there are people who call themselves Antifa who punch Nazis in the face, they take that to a whole nother level. But then when you look at in Germany, they've got statues of women who've punched Nazis in the face, right? So I guess they're Antifa too. So I think that that's definitely been kind of taken out of like that. Now when you say Antifa on like Fox News and stuff, they think it's like this radical gang that's trying to destroy America. And really it's like people who want to make sure that Nazis don't take over our country so we don't end up like Germany. As far as I think your question was like, do we work with them?
Directly with Antifa or Antifa chapters?
I don't even know if there's like Antifa chapters per se. I think that we work with people who identify as anti-fascists, and we work with people who agree that to defend us from fascists, because the police don't defend us. I mean, just the other week we got credible death threats. We had a man show up to one of our offices waving a gun around, talking about he wants to kill the BLM commies. And turns out, people were like, why didn't you call the cops? The cops send him there. It was a police union that gave the name of the office, which then got ran up by this guy. So when we're in a situation where the police are sending people to kill us, sending people they know, are a little bit off the rocker and that, who are unstable, who they know, all they have to do is give them an address and these people will show up and have nothing to lose. We do have to work with people who are going to defend us from that because the police won't. And so, anyone that says that they will, defend us from Nazis, which makes them Antifa, we'll
welcome over here.
Yeah.
I like that. All right, so let me ask you this. When I was out at the protests, I saw, we'll call it 10% black people. That might be generous. This movement, this moment, this rallying cry has really struck a chord, a human chord, I believe, because I've seen people of all colors, from all walks of life, people with turbans, people who don't even speak the language. Maybe you speak Mandarin, whatever your background is. If you are a human, you are our brother and our sister, and you showed up, right? So I do want to take this moment to ask, what is it that you can do for Black Lives Matter if you are, let's say, a white ally? We've seen this happen. We've seen our white allies get killed. I remember in Virginia, I think it was, I forget the name of the city, but there's at the University of Virginia, there was a woman who got hit by a car some years back at a protest, and actually went to that campus just to kind of walk around and just take that in, because I saw it on the side of the road as I was driving toward Tennessee, and I forget her name, and that and then obviously the other day in Wisconsin, someone lost his life. A couple of people lost their lives actually, and they were there in support of Black Lives Matter. So obviously there's a desire to help, specifically to white folks or non-black people. What would you say is the best way to approach helping the movement?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest part is helping, and that is important because when you mention like Antifa and like these other groups that come out to support, we definitely welcome them as long as they like follow our leadership. There are times when we do have like white people who will go off script and decide to do something that we don't want them to do, or not even realize the way that their privilege. Their privilege allows them to yell in a cop's face, and but then who gets harmed by it? It's us. And so, it's not even that we don't want you to do that, but don't do that next to black people, because we're the ones taking the heat. We even had an incident where this white guy threw a water bottle at a cop, and they grabbed one of our members, black and Latino man, who was not the person who threw the water bottle. And in the court, when they took it to court, it said that a white man had thrown this water bottle, and so the case got dropped because they're like, clearly this is a black man, and you arrested him, even though in your police report you said it was a white man who did this harm. So I think that it's important that white folks recognize their privilege and not kind of go off script, but to follow black leadership and keep showing up. And we appreciate it, and we need y'all because Black Lives Matter isn't about that no other lives matter. In fact, all lives do matter, but or they will matter once Black Lives Matter. But currently, Black lives don't matter. So if Black lives don't matter, then all lives cannot matter. And so we have to also realize that, what we're asking for, what Black Lives Matter is, it's a call for human rights. So if you're against Black Lives Matter, that also means that you're against human rights, right, for all. Because that's what we're asking for. So we really appreciate people from all walks of life, people from all races in different countries showing up and helping us to make Black Lives Matter. And we ask that, you follow Black leadership. And obviously, I think that it should be also specified that doesn't just mean any Black person. But people in
a leadership position, people
that are rooted and grounded in community, like the Black community, because it is we are only 13% in the country. In Phoenix, we're 6%. So, we couldn't have thousands of people out there if it was just us, right? We need y'all, and we appreciate y'all being there for us and coming up and showing up. And we just ask that you follow our leadership and follow what we're doing, because, we do often get in trouble when people do decide to go off script.
Okay. Now there's another thing that I saw when I was first sort of made aware. I mean, I'm not going to give too much away, but there's a group chat that exists, and there's a space for white allies to engage with Black Lives Matter. And I was able to see some of the calls to action, and one of them included effectively it was saying help as a human shield, keep the police away from us. And another one was it spoke to reparations. I want you to touch on those two as well.
Yeah, most definitely. So, when white people ask us what is their role in the movement, we believe that they have three prominent roles. One is for reparations, and that's reparations, not charity. It's not that you're donating to us. We have to understand when we, again, take it back to how wealth was created in the first place. It was created through theft of land, genocide of Native Americans, and enslavement of Africans. So everything that y'all have, we built this country, and I think that it's also important to note that that all of their wealth is theft. Even if in the last couple generations, y'all worked hard, it's important to realize how you had it in the first place. So that's why we're not asking for charity, we're not asking for donations, we're asking for reparations, and we believe it's white people's duty to be able to give to us, because that's how we begin to right the wrongs that were done, and that's how we begin to change the inequalities. We don't have the Black communities are disinvested from, but the white communities have all that investment from. So if we're going to change inequality, we have to talk about redistribution of wealth, and that doesn't come from save the poor Blackies. That comes from do you want to address these harms? Do you want to really begin to address the cracks in this nation's foundation. That's really what it's a call for. When we call for white people to use their body as a human shield, we are saying that because we believe that, and we know that the way white privilege acts is that if we had black people as a shield around us, all those black people getting maced, arrested, and beat up, maybe killed, right? But we know they would never do that to white people. So we're asking them to use their privilege to shield us. And that's not that white people are our saviors. We're asking them to be race traitors. We're asking them to be a traitor to the privilege they were given to protect black folks. And then the last thing is to get your racist uncle. Like, many of y'all have racist family members. Many of y'all have, are related to the people who are now oppressing us. So y'all can speak to them in a way that we could never, right? Anytime we talk to your uncle, your cousin, whatever, that's we're speaking as an outer group. But when, your daughter speaks to you have a harder time ignoring that. So if you know that, you have family members who are racist, who are harmful, who are police, then you should have those conversations with them. You should, again, be that race traitor, use your privilege to support black folks. So
when people make a donation, exactly how does that impact, like where does it go? How does that impact Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, so it goes, it directly goes to supporting the work. Currently, Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro, we're an all-volunteer org. We have like an all-volunteer staff, and we're trying to change that because we believe black people should be paid for their labor. And over the summer, many of us have been working more than full-time for free. Currently, all the funding goes to our rent, to the supplies, to food. Food is a really important one for us because it's part of how we build community and part of our African indigenous values of Ubuntu. I am because of you. We take care of each other. And so as we're trying to build the village, we realize, we got to feed the children and anyone else who's there. And so we try to have that at our meetings, our in-person meetings. We also take care of the community, whether it's, supporting people through bailing them out through the Black People's Justice Fund, or helping them get into hotels so that single black mothers or black trans women don't have to sleep on the streets and be harassed by the police, or whether it's supporting people in their making sure that they can get into housing, or it also goes into all of the other kind of infrastructure that we've had to build, whether it's like our website or our Zoom, or all of the other kind of subscription services that we're using to run this org. So it goes directly into the work. And currently, we don't have like an admin team. So that work, those funds are directly going back into this work.
Now, you mentioned something about community, and something that I know to be true, growing up in California and spending so much time here in Arizona, is that, a lot of times community also extends to our Hispanic brothers and sisters. What is it that Black Lives Matter is doing on behalf of our Hispanic brothers and sisters who deal with the same sort of oppression, same sort of social injustices? What is it that, and how have we worked together with them to make the community safer and better?
Yeah, so Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro, we work directly with organizations like Poder in Action, which works on police brutality, but also on immigration. Trans Queer Pueblo, which works with trans migrants. And Puente, who is also another human rights organization that works on immigration issues. And we work on this because we understand that, we rise in solidarity with all oppressed people, and we realize that especially because of the way they treat black people in this country, we realize that if they're also oppressing brown people, we're not free. We're not free until we're all free. So we do realize that these issues affect us, and we also realize that we're stronger together. So we're in coalition with many of these orgs, with Civilian Review Board, which we got passed in Phoenix in December. That was a coalition of Black and brown organizations that came together and realized that police brutality is affecting our communities. And we were able to build this powerful union because Black and brown folks came together. We also, will support victims of police brutality.
I've seen that.
Of brown victims, but we follow the leadership of brown orcs because we also realize our place in that. So with the Antonio Arce, and more recently James Garcia, we followed the leadership of Poder's work because they're able to connect with the community, they're able to speak Spanish, they're able to connect with the community in ways that we realized we wouldn't be able to, but we still are going to show up for the protests. We're still going to follow their leadership and how they ask us to show up, because until all of us are free, none of us are free. And we not only are in solidarity with brown organizations, we're also recognize that we're on stolen Akimo, Atum, and Pipash land, and we support Native struggles. And so we've gone out to Oak Flat. We go up actually monthly to a place called Black Mesa. It's in the Navajo Nation. We've been doing food runs, supporting now up to 60 people, because we realize our liberation is interconnected with all oppressed peoples, and so we build and rise in solidarity with them all.
Absolutely. And I want to speak to this real quick. These are things, the two events that you mentioned, or one of the events that you mentioned, which was a protest when I think he was sleeping in his car and the police killed him in his driveway, I want to say. So I went to that protest, and he was Mexican. And I did see all the things that you were saying, following brown leadership. A lot of it was in Spanish or otherwise translated in Spanish and so forth. And then I know that there's a push to really support the trans community by Black Lives Matter. And I've actually been to those protests as well, in the front, helping carry the banner, all that sort of stuff. So I actually can personally vouch for the fact that Black Lives Matter has shown up for peoples that may not traditionally fit the role of, they're not the popularly oppressed, but I think that when you said that we all rise together in solidarity, I think that really speaks to the at least one of the core values, insofar as I can tell, of Black Lives Matter. Now, I do want to ask a question that has been submitted to me. This one came from California. So why is it that Black Lives Matter is not doing more about the murders in Chicago? Why is that not as visible as some of the other things that Black Lives Matter is doing?
So I think it's important to look at why those murders are happening in the first place, and how do we address them from a systemic issue, right? And so when we look at the history of gangs in the United States, gangs were first started because to protect from white supremacists and police. And so they were originally started to as a way to protect us, because we did not have, we knew the police were terrorizing us and white supremacists were terrorizing us, and we had to protect ourselves because, you look at places like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was burned down by, by white people and the government, because they didn't like to see black people do well. So black people started looking for a way to protect themselves, and they created a way, and then that method then kind of, after a while, perverted upon itself. But then you also have to look at the history of that, and it's happened in multiple cities, including the city I'm from in Seattle, where the police would go tell one gang that this gang said this about you. And then they would go tell the other gang, and then they would record what they said. And once they found out this lie that the police created, then they would take it to the other gang, and then they would show them that, so as to create war between these gangs. Right. And then you have to look at the history of the war on drugs, which was a war on black and brown people. And then you have to look at the crack epidemic, which the government actually during the Cold War was taking drugs from South America, who they were also destabilizing those countries, and then they were bringing it over into the hood and putting crack into the hood to create the conditions we are in now. So when you look at the hood and you see, gangs and drug-infested neighborhoods, you have to understand that the government did that. You have to understand that white America did that. And so when we look at how do we address that, it's not that, gun laws. Chicago has some of the strictest gun laws. That's not helping. It's not that further criminalization. It's not that to create these gang registries to further surveil black neighborhoods. None of that works. What works is what we're asking: defunding the police and investing in community. If those kids had many of the services in the first place, they wouldn't have to join the gangs. They're joining the gangs because they often are in families without fathers, and we have to look at why that is too. It's so often blamed on black women or blamed on all of these other conditions of black people, but you have to understand, in America, 1 in 3 black men are in jail. 1 in 3. So when you look at, and the ages that they're most often in jail is between the ages of 18 and 35, which are, so they're locking up the fathers and then blaming us for being fatherless, and then saying it's because of the content of our character that we're fatherless when you put all of our men in jail. And so we really have to address these things. We have to, the way we see it, the way we address it, is to abolish police and prisons and to create new systems of safety. And that's what, the defund invest is about. It's about creating after school programs. It's about creating stronger social safety nets so those kids don't have to feel like there's no one looking out for them and that they have to join this gang for protection, because that's what it's about. It's about protection. So if we can make sure black children don't feel unsafe, how do we make those neighborhoods unsafe? How do we make those neighborhoods safer? We invest in those communities, and we prevent the police who created these problems in the first place. It was the police and the FBI who put the crack in those neighborhoods. It's the police who took those fathers away. And so we really have to address it from a systemic side. And so often these Fox News talking points are really like blaming black people for killing themselves. And we have to understand that this is the result of the societal conditions. It's the result of intergenerational trauma, the trauma of being ripped apart. These families have been being broken up since slavery, and they never ended it. They just renamed it as prison, right? And so when we call for the abolition of prisons, it's a continuation of the call of the abolition of slavery. Because, with the 13th Amendment, you have that clause in there that says that, slavery has ended except if,
in these circumstances.
If you are a criminal. And then what is now, you don't even have to say the N-word. You just call us criminals, right? And so this, again, it's the continuation of slavery. And so how do we begin to address these systemic issues and this intergenerational trauma? We invest in these communities who've been disinvested from day one.
And I think that that really speaks to the fact that there's a lot of disinformation floating around out there. One of the things that comes to mind is the myth that black men are bad fathers. What comes to mind is there was a report from the CDC, and this will be my final thought. A few years ago, and you're welcome to Google it if you're tuning in or listening, but it turns out that black men are doing best of all races if you break it down by race. This is the Center for Disease Control. They did a study on black parenting, black fathers specifically, and as it turns out, black fathers are most engaged, most present. And so there's this prevailing myth that that's the case. And So a lot of this disinformation requires further research. But unfortunately, we're out of time. And so before I go, I want to implore you to send us all your questions, any topics that you want. Keep in mind, this is a community-supported show, so you can donate on the website, civiccipher.com. Civic Cipher is all of our social media. You can follow me at RamsesJah. And Zarra, go ahead and leave them with your social media as well.
Yeah, so if you want to follow our work in BLM Phoenix Metro, pretty much on all platforms, we are BLM PHX Metro, and our website's that.org. And if you want to follow my personal page, it's Zebra Tekola, Tekola. Yeah, that's on IG.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Civic Cipher. Be sure to check us out next week. Same time, same channel. And yeah, until then, stay safe, y'all.